The 50s and 60s saw Ferrari as the world's top manufacturer of specialized GT automobiles. From 1955 to 1959, the 250 GT long wheelbase Ferraris dominated their classes in European racing. During those years, the Ferrari won the Tour de France every single year. In October of 1959, Ferrari ushered in a new Berlinetta design. The car was known as the 250 SWB for short wheelbase. With the drivetrain and chassis based on previous 250 models, the car sported a new Pininfarina design and was destined for both road and track use. Scaglietti remained the bodybuilder, and the car was available in two configurations, competition and street. Throughout its three-year production run, 175 250 SWB models were constructed. Most had steel bodies with aluminum doors and lids. An all-aluminum version, as seen here, was also produced. The competition version also included plexiglass side and rear windows and aluminum trim, including aluminum bumpers. In its initial outings, the car ran in the sports car categories because it was not immediately homologated by the FIA as a GT car. But because of its superb performance, SWB models finished 4th, 6th, and 7th overall in their first race at the 1960 12 Hours of Sebring. Homologation papers were finally signed prior to Le Mans in June of 1960. And you know, you had to like Ferrari's chances at Le Mans. Not only was the car dominating the racing scene, but the team drivers were scattering the competition badly with the Testarossas at that time. The results were not too surprising at Le Mans that year. Ferraris took 1st, 2nd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th overall, with the 250 SWB following the 1st and 2nd place Testarossas in the 4th slot. For the 6th consecutive year, Ferrari also swept the Tour de France, with SWBs taking the first 3 places in that prestigious event. To maintain reliability in his cars, Ferrari did not like to make wholesale design changes. The Colombo-designed V12 had worked well before and would work well again in the 250 series. In street form, the 3-liter motor put out 240 horsepower at 7,000 RPM. In its competition form, as seen here, it produced nearly 280 horsepower. Although it featured updated cylinder head design, single ignition and single overhead cams were retained. This particular example, serial number 2035, has been raced by its current owner in Europe and in the United States. We talked with owner Ed Swart about this much sought-after classic.
Built in 1960, and it was owned by a Portuguese driver who became Portuguese champion in it in several hill climbs and races he did, and he raced it for about 3 years, and then the car went into a museum of Dr. de la Cerda in Portugal also, and he had it in the museum until the early 70s, and then his son took it to England, and I bought it in 1975 in England. So it only had 3 owners.
And you've been Vinnings racing the car in the United States since you've been here?
Yeah, I have. I raced the car since 1976 in Europe, and I came to the United States in 1980, and I raced 81, 82, 83, the Laguna Seca race, and several other races, Riverside, and it's been pretty good.
Pretty good indeed. not only for the owners and drivers of these cars, but for the thousands of fans each year who attend vintage sports car races around the world and relive the bygone era of run what you brung, close-track racing. A high level of preparation is necessary to refurbish these cars for competition, and a keen interest by vintage racing buffs the past several years has brought out thousands of examples of vintage racing machinery, each with a story of its own to tell.
We've just seen a little action of you at Laguna Seca in '83, having some fun with an Alpha GTZ. Was that the highlight of this year's racing package for you?
Yeah, probably. I think it was also the highlight of the weekend, according to what people told me. It was very nice, and it was some real racing. It was real competition, and I enjoyed that, and the car is built for that. But I decided after that race not to race the car anymore.
The 250 had its transmission in line with the engine. This 4-speed all-synchromesh unit was tied to a live axle in the rear, supported by semi-elliptic leaf springs and trailing arms on either side. Disc brakes were used all around with Baroni wire wheels and center-lock hubs. The 250 SWB and its successor, the 250 GTO, have to be recorded as two of the greatest GT cars ever produced. Their performance, whether on the track or off, was nothing short of spectacular. The early 1960s saw Ferrari producing a series of mid-engined, small-capacity V6 cars, the engine capacity varying from 2 to 2.4 liters. They were produced to do battle with the 2-liter Porsche RS Spyder series. 1965 witnessed the appearance of the Dino 166P. Fitted with a new 2-liter V6, it won the European Hill Climb Championship. This car evolved into the 206 SP in 1966. Hopes were to build the necessary 50 cars for homologation, but this was never to be. As a result, only 18 were finally completed. There were several variations in these cars, but the overall constant was the simplicity and beauty in the Drogo design, which carried over into the larger 330 P3 racers as well. The developed 206P was not really pushed by Ferrari as a racing automobile. This particular example, number 002, was probably one of the most successful 206 SPs in existence. In May of 1966, it won first in class as well as second overall at Targa Florio, and in the same month at Spa, won again first in class with a 6th overall. It graced the cover of Road and Track in August of 1967 and has since undergone a meticulous restoration, as you can see. All 206s had a 65-degree 2-liter V6 engine. Both single and dual plug heads were seen on various versions of the model. The 206 featured aluminum bodywork stretched over a tubular steel frame. The engine, with twin-cam heads, produced approximately 220 horsepower at 9,000 RPM. Rear brake calipers were mounted inboard to reduce unsprung weight. The inboard design required the brakes to be cooled directly through air ducts. The primary competition for the 206 was Porsche's Carrera 6. This 2-liter lightweight also used a tubular steel chassis, but utilized fiberglass instead of aluminum for the skin, thereby giving it a weight advantage. Pininfarina carried the 206 design directly into the 206 GT and the later 246 GT. Today, 206 number 002 enjoys victories in Concours d'Elegance, as well as an occasional vintage race romp, such as this 1983 example. 1963 saw the first of the V12 mid-engined race cars from Ferrari. These stunningly beautiful sports racers were manufactured in both the Berlinetta and Spider forms, but were never to enjoy the overall dominance that the front-engine cars had enjoyed during the previous 10 years. The mid-engined 250LM was introduced at the Paris Salon in 1963. Ferrari's intentions were to homologate the car for the 3-liter GT class. Designated a 250, it was actually a 275, as total motor capacity reached 3.3 liters. Homologation didn't come until 1966, but this did not prevent Ferrari from campaigning a most successful racing automobile. The LM designation stood for Le Mans. For races like Le Mans, strength and reliability were of utmost importance. The chassis of the 250 was constructed of small diameter tubing with a very high strength-to-weight ratio. The outer skin and inner panels were constructed entirely of aluminum. The car weighed just over 1,800 pounds, a relatively low weight considering the car was outfitted for street use. The roofline and rear deck area were quite similar in appearance to the second series of 250 GTOs. The rear section followed the popular calm styling of the era. At the same time Ferrari was introducing the 250LM, Porsche was designing a very similar appearing mid-engined racer, the 904 GTS, only in 2-liter form. The interior was very straightforward, with right-hand drive for European racetracks. The pedal assembly was supported by a cast alloy housing. Lightly padded seats were formed over aluminum shells. The seats were easily removable and revealed the tubular frame structure beneath them. A 5-speed gated shift lever mechanism linked the driver with a transaxle at the rear of the engine. The rear section was hinged at the front, this to prevent accidental opening at racing speeds. In its open position, engine access is good, but care must be taken to prop the lid properly on a windy day. The familiar V12 was mounted longitudinally just ahead of the transaxle. Although 2 ignition distributors are used, only a single plug is provided for each cylinder. 6 dual-throat Weber carburetors mix the air and fuel and help the motor produce its 305 horsepower at 7,500 RPM. Fuel tanks mounted on either side provide for efficient weight distribution. Quick-release fillers are affixed to each tank. Suspension was independent all around, with double wishbones. Each wheel is supported by a coil-over Coney shock absorber. Rear brakes were mounted inboard. 4-wheel disc brakes and center-locking Barani wire wheels completed the competition package. In 1964, the model's first year of competition, the LMs were most successful. But 1965 was to be their finest hour at Le Mans. Gregory and Rindt brought an LM home to a first-place victory, while a similar car, number 6023, finished second with Lanlois and Elde aboard. Number 6023 was to appear again at Le Mans in 1966, driven by Gosselin and Decine. But as we shall soon see, their attempt was not as successful as the 1965 effort, for in 1966, Ford had a better idea. The yellow LM of Gosselin Decine appears as number 28 in this race. The number 28 LM hangs in until 8:30 a.m. when a blown head gasket retires the car. The Fords keep charging through the night and on into daylight hours and perform well, oh so well. They finally finish the race 1, 2, 3. In 1967, Ford was again at the Sarthe circuit, this time with its computer-designed Ford Mark IVs, competing head-to-head with Ferrari's new P4s. The P4s tried valiantly, but the Gurney-Foyt Ford runs a perfect race and wins. In 1968, 3-liter GTs were out in full force. Ford is back, this time with its 5-liter Mark 1B. Alfa is also there with its new 3-liter racer. And Porsche has a squadron of long-tail 3-liter 908s. 3 LMs are to start this race. Number 5893, a Nart car, racing as number 14. The Vesti Pike car, number 6167, racing as number 19. And the Piper Atwood racer, number 8165, seen in this race as number 21. The race at Le Mans that year was run in the fall under rather trying weather conditions. Porsches dominate at the start of the race, copping the first 4 positions at the conclusion of the first lap. But they began to falter and dropped out as the Fords begin to pick up the pace. The Alfas give a very strong showing. 2 of the 3 LMs are out of the race, and only the Piper Atwood car continues. The number 14 Nart LM remains parked as the Alfas continue. As the race nears conclusion, two of the surviving Porsches, a 907 and a 908, begin an attack, while the Alphas continue their strong showing. At the end, it's Alpha 4th, 5th, and 6th, Porsche 2nd and 3rd, and the number 21 LM of Piper Atwood is 7th. And to Ford goes the victor's spoils. It first appeared in 1972, the Boxer. From the beginning, it was meant to replace Ferrari's Daytona. With its midship 5-liter pancake engine, it was to be the ultimate in GT performance. As the Boxer progressed through the 1970s, it upheld its image as the absolute muscle car, constantly holding off the challenge of Lamborghini's Countach and Porsche's 930 Turbo. In 1979, the Ferrari factory offered competition versions of the Boxer to interested racers. Let's listen as Ferrari enthusiast John Masterson talks about his 512 bblm.
The derivative of the number has to do with, of course, the Boxer that's produced for street use by the factory. Berlinetta Boxer meaning closed car, and Boxer meaning the opposed 12-cylinder engine. The 512, of course, is a 5-liter 12. The BB is just a reverse of the normal designation for the street car, but the LM was basically Le Mans designation. And the car was basically designed exclusively for Le Mans, or its purpose was. Mm-hmm. It is not a factory race car. It's what they call a customer car, which means that they produce a car ready for racing, and then it's up to the individual team or purchaser to race the car himself, and so you don't have direct factory involvement.
Owning a 512 bblm ensures a certain amount of exclusivity in Ferrari circles.
As far as I know, there was approximately 25 of these cars produced during a period from about late 1978 up through spring of 1983. They were raced in private hands from that period on, or during that period, and were supplied by the factory. The factory was interested in putting the cars in hands of racers, if possible. Although I think if you had the money and you showed up over there, you could probably get a car, but then I think if you knew somebody or had an entree to the factory, you had a much better chance of acquiring a car, but they were not extremely exclusive, but somewhat exclusive. I acquired the car in January following the time it was built. It was built in October, according to the factory sheets I acquired. And it was in the hands of a private individual who took delivery, was going to race the car, and decided not to. So basically I had a car that had been driven at Fiorano racetrack and tested, delivered to Switzerland, and had been in a garage from November through January, and then I picked the car up. So I had a new car, basically.
To maintain the car properly and to protect his investment, an owner must show some restraints. Masterson explains.
I have enjoyed currently just running some vintage racing and some club events, but I have considered entering the car at something like the Riverside 6-hour. Probably with the right help and a little coaxing, I could get into that. But as it stands right now, I'm very content with the car at club racing and vintage racing outings.
car was set up as an endurance racer, which means it's maybe not tweaked quite like a sprint racer. What does this mean in terms of reliability and service required?
Well, I think the car as it sits now is an ideal vintage and club racer because it, as you said, isn't as tuned as a sprint racer such as formula cars. The fact that the car is built for Le Mans specifically and other enduros such as 6 and 8 hour events means that the car is built for 24 hours of endurance. Therefore, the performance of the engine is detuned, red line and cams and that type of thing, so that it's an ideal situation for someone like myself or others that were interested in a more casual approach to racing, if you will.
Yeah.
So that certainly helps the car. In this particular instance, I've rebuilt the engine once, and that was after about 45 hours of less than flat-out driving. So that aspect of it makes it very desirable, and say nothing the fact that it's less expensive to go through these every few years.
The LM is a beautiful piece of engineering technology. The 460 horsepower Flat 12 uses Lucas mechanical fuel injection. The Boxer's 4 camshafts are belt-driven. 4 air jacks are built into the car and allow wheels to be changed in quick fashion. Recommended racing rubber is Michelin, riding on 11-inch front and 14-inch wide rear rims. The suspension consists of upper and lower A-arms all around. The splined center lock hubs carry Campanolo wheels. Single caliper Lockheed brakes grab the 13-inch vented discs. The rear suspension uses 2 Coney shocks surrounded by coil springs on each side. At 2,300 pounds, the car is considerably lighter than the stock 512, which weighs in at over 3,000 pounds.